And then there's that company where the director brought a talented young man in beside him and later tried to destroy him when he realized everyone was starting to prefer the newcomer. I know. The worst part began when he decided there was only one way to stay in control. But to understand how all of this started, when this young man first joined the company, obviously no one saw him as a threat. After all, he did not even come in to take an important position. He showed up at a time when the director was already not doing well. From the outside, he still looked like the same powerful man he had always been. He made the decisions. Everyone obeyed, and no one would have dared tell him to his face that something was wrong. But it was. Some days he locked himself in his office and refused to see anyone. Other days, he exploded over the smallest things. The team started measuring every word before walking into the room. You know when an entire workplace changes depending on one person's mood? It was like that. And thank goodness I did not work directly for him. From a distance, he already seemed bad enough. I do not even know exactly how it happened, but someone realized things could not keep going like that and decided to introduce this young man to the director. They said he was talented, calm, and had this strange ability to settle people down. And surprisingly, the director agreed to meet him. It was the best thing that could have happened. Seriously. Whenever the young man was around, the director seemed to return to normal. He communicated better. He thought more clearly. Even the atmosphere in the company felt lighter. So he began calling him in more often. At first, only during those difficult moments. Then, just to keep him close even when there was no crisis. And that was how an unknown young man started moving closer and closer to the most powerful person there. Everything seemed normal. The director liked him. He genuinely did. I even think he enjoyed taking on the role of mentor. The young man was useful, discreet. He did not try to draw attention to himself. And most importantly, he was not casting a shadow yet. But of course, peace at work never lasts forever. The problem began sometime later, when a crisis came up that no one wanted to face. A competitor started humiliating the company in public, and he was not subtle about it. He showed up in front of everyone, challenged the entire team, and practically begged someone to try to take him on. And no one did. The executives came up with elegant excuses. The more experienced people insisted that the timing was not right. Everyone had an excellent explanation for doing absolutely nothing, until the young man looked around and asked, "Are you really going to let this continue?" I know. The person who had barely arrived was the only one brave enough to say out loud what everyone else was trying to avoid. I thought he was a little bold, but he also seemed to be the only person genuinely willing to deal with it. He did not have the experience everyone swore was essential. He did not have the right title. And honestly, he was nowhere near the person the director would have chosen to represent the company in a situation like that. Even so, he insisted. He said he could handle it. The director tried to talk him out of it. He explained that it was not that simple. He offered resources, a team, an entire plan prepared by people with far more experience, and the young man turned down almost all of it. He said he would do it his way, and he went alone, even from a distance. I could tell what he was doing was far too risky. Either that young man was going to do incredibly well, or his career was going to end right there. And was I right? Because that was the exact moment the relationship between them began to change. The young man did not just solve the problem, he solved it in such an unlikely way that no one could talk about anything else. Within hours, that quiet employee had become the most talked about person in the company. People who had never even heard of him were praising him. The press wanted to know where he had come from, and employees repeated the story in every hallway. And the director? At first, he loved it. Of course he did. The young man worked for him. That victory made the director look stronger too. I can almost imagine him thinking, "Look who I discovered." Then came the celebration. The director walked in and people applauded. Perfectly normal. But when the young man appeared, the reaction got louder. A lot louder. And then someone decided to compare them out loud. They said the director had already achieved a great deal, but that this young man would go even further. I do not know who thought that was a good idea. It was only one sentence. But you know how people are. Sometimes they forget the entire compliment and remember only the part that wounded their pride. And that sentence stayed with him. After that celebration, everything became a sign. Of course, only in his head. If someone praised the young man's courage, the director heard it as if they were calling him weak. If the young man won again, it started to look like a rehearsal for replacing him. And if he walked into a room and everyone was happy to see him, the director wanted to know why. The most absurd part was that the young man was not campaigning for anything. He was not asking for attention. He was not competing for space. He simply kept working and delivering results, which, for someone already consumed by insecurity, was almost worse, because the more natural the young man's success looked, the harder it became for the director to pretend it did not bother him. Now imagine what happened when he realized his own family was getting close to the young man too. Seriously. The director's son became his best friend. And this was not a friendship of convenience. They formed a real bond. The son trusted him, and he began to notice that his father no longer looked at his friend the same way. As if that were not enough, one of the director's daughters fell in love with the young man. Now think about what that looked like to someone already obsessed with being replaced. The employees admired the young man. The public celebrated him. The son treated him like a brother. And the daughter wanted to bring him fully into the family. He had placed that young man beside him. And now it looked as if everyone was helping the young man move into the center. Then came the first incident that no one could explain away as a simple misunderstanding. The young man was in the office, doing exactly what he had been called in to do so many times before, trying to calm the director down. But that day, something felt wrong. The director was not shouting. He was not exploding. He was quiet. Too quiet. And honestly, I think that was worse. For a few minutes, it looked like a normal meeting. Then the director grabbed a heavy object from the desk and threw it at him. Just like that, out of nowhere. The young man barely managed to move in time. And I imagine he walked out wondering whether that had really happened, because this was the same man who had opened doors for him. The same man who said he trusted him. The same man who, not long before, had seemed proud to be his mentor. So maybe the young man thought it was a crisis. He lost control. But other incidents followed, and eventually there was no room left for doubt. This was not just a crisis. Obviously, the young man was frightened, and so was the director's family. The son became worried about his friend. The daughter realized this had gone far beyond professional jealousy. And by then, the entire office was talking about the boss's outbursts in the hallways. No one knew exactly what to do. After all, he was still the most powerful person in the company. But while everyone else was trying to figure out how to handle him, the director was already thinking of something else. He realized that attacking the young man openly only made him look completely out of control. So he changed his strategy. And seriously, this part would almost seem clever if the outcome were not so disturbing. Instead of pushing the young man away, he began promoting him. No, you did not hear that wrong. He promoted him, gave him more responsibility, placed him in increasingly important positions. But every promotion came with a mission worse than the one before. It was always the crisis no one else wanted, the most dangerous problem, the situation most likely to end badly. The plan was simple. If the young man failed, everyone would stop admiring him. If the assignment destroyed his career, even better, make it look like an opportunity, when it was really a trap. There was only one problem. The young man always came back, and every time he returned, he brought another victory with him. Another story racing through the hallways. More people asking how he managed to make everything work. Every mission designed to erase him only made him bigger. And I can imagine the director's desperation as he realized that the more he tried to push the young man out, the more everyone seemed convinced he deserved to be at the center. The obsession grew so intense that he decided to involve his own daughter. Yes, his own daughter. He realized she cared about the young man and turned that into another opportunity. He said he would approve of the relationship, but there was a condition. The young man would have to take on a project so difficult that no one else wanted to go near it. And honestly, it did not feel like a test of competence. It felt like a trap designed to make him fail in public. The director was counting on one thing. The young man would accept in order to prove he deserved that woman and walk away with his career destroyed. But he accepted, and he succeeded. He did not merely deliver what they had asked for, he delivered more. I can imagine the director's face when he realized even that trap had become another victory. By then, the obsession had turned into fear. He was convinced the young man wanted his position. There was only one small problem. No one had ever heard the young man say that. There was no secret plan, no campaign to bring down the boss. The threat existed almost entirely in the director's mind. But to him, it felt completely real. That was when the son realized things had gone far beyond every limit. His father called in a few people close to him and made his intention very clear. The young man had to be removed from the path. Not merely removed from the company, he wanted to destroy the young man's reputation and close every door that might still open for him. The son ran to warn his friend. He told him he needed to step away for a while. Then he went back and tried to reason with his father. He reminded him of everything the young man had done for them. He said the young man had never betrayed anyone, that it made no sense to turn someone who had only helped them into an enemy. And for a moment, it seemed to work. The director promised to leave it behind. He called the young man back, and everyone tried to behave as if the crisis had passed. But it had not. Sometime later, the director threatened him again. This time, the young man understood there was no trust left, and there was definitely no future for him in that company. So, he left, and it would be natural to assume the story ended there. The young man was gone. The director kept his position. They would each move on with their lives. But no, the young man left the company. He just did not leave the director's mind. The director started using his contacts to find out where the young man was. He pressured former colleagues. He wanted to know who still spoke to him and who was offering him opportunities. If someone helped the young man, they were treated as disloyal. If another company showed interest, the director tried to interfere. This was no longer about protecting the business. It was personal persecution. Meanwhile, the young man was trying to rebuild his life. He moved from place to place, accepted smaller jobs, and began gathering around him other people who had also been discarded or mistreated. Even after everything, he still refused to attack his former boss. Until an opportunity appeared, the young man gained access to information that could have ended the director's career. All he had to do was send it to the press. His friends told him, "This is it. End it." And he could have ended everything. After all he had suffered, many people would even have called it fair. But he did not. He kept only one piece of proof that he had gotten close enough. Then he called the director and showed it to him. It was like saying, "I could have destroyed you. I chose not to." The director fell silent. For the first time, he seemed to understand how far he had gone. He admitted the young man had acted better than he had. He apologized and promised to stop. Beautiful, right? Except it did not last. By then, the young man had understood something. An apology is not the same as change. So he left for good. He left the company, that family, and everything he had built there. Not because he had lost, but because staying close to that man was no longer safe. And now comes the part that changes this entire story. What I have told you already sounds bad enough. But would you believe me if I told you it was all far more extreme than this? And there is one more important detail. It did not happen in that company. In fact, it did not happen in our time at all. The director was Saul, the first king of Israel, and the young man he brought in beside him was David. The story is recorded in 1 Samuel, especially chapters 16 through 26. But the original version was far more extreme. The crisis no one wanted to face was Goliath. The object thrown across the office was a spear. The assignments meant to destroy David's career were battles Saul expected him not to survive. And the persecution was not merely professional. Saul truly mobilized men to hunt him down. The strangest part is that David had more than one opportunity to kill Saul, and chose to spare him every time. That is how the man chosen to calm a king became exactly what the king feared most: his successor. Now that we know who they were, the question becomes, when did David truly become a threat to Saul? It was not when he defeated Goliath. At that point, Saul still wanted the young man close. The change came when the people began comparing them. Saul was celebrated, but David was celebrated even more. And that comparison touched a fear that already existed. Saul had already been told that his kingdom would not remain in his family, so when he saw a young man winning battles, winning over the people, and even winning over his own household, he began to see a possible replacement. But did David actually want Saul's position? The text shows no plan, coup, or conspiracy. On the contrary, when David had opportunities to kill Saul, he spared him. And that is where the story becomes ironic. Saul spent so long treating David like a rival that he eventually created exactly what he feared. David fled. Other people began gathering around him, and the young man who did not appear to be competing for the throne slowly began to look like the only possible alternative. Saul did not lose David because David conspired against the king. He lost David because he made it impossible for him to remain an ally. Over time, this relationship has been understood in different ways. Some readings see Saul as a man consumed by envy. Others go further. For them, the real problem was not David. It was Saul's fear of losing the thing that defined who he was. Without the throne, who would he be? Maybe that is why every victory David achieved felt so personal. It did not matter what the young man was doing. What mattered was what his presence made Saul feel. There is another common reading too. David did not need to tear power from Saul's hands. He simply kept growing while Saul destroyed himself trying to stop him. And perhaps that is why the two moments when David spares Saul's life matter so much. They do not merely show that David refused revenge. They also make it clear that he did not need to cause Saul's fall. Saul was already doing that himself. None of these interpretations settles the story completely, but they all lead toward the same question. Was Saul really fighting David? Or was he fighting the possibility that he was no longer indispensable? And this is where the story stops being only about a king and the young man he came to fear. Because this happens in ordinary teams too. Sometimes, someone helps hire a talented person, shows them how everything works, opens doors, introduces them to the right people. At first, they even feel proud. Then that person starts growing too quickly, they receive praise, they are chosen for important projects. They become a real contender for the next promotion. And just like that, the talent that once felt like a team achievement starts to feel like a personal threat. It does not always come from a boss. It can come from the colleague who believed that position would be theirs, from the person who starts hiding information, leaving someone out of meetings, and turning small mistakes into major problems, from someone who would rather watch the project fail than see another person receive the credit. And the strangest part is that many times, no one was trying to steal anyone's place. The competition existed only in the mind of the person who had started interpreting growth as replacement. That was what happened with Saul. David did not need to declare war. He only had to keep growing. And for someone already afraid of losing his place, that was enough. Would you believe I have been on the other side of this? Once, I worked at a company where I helped hire the person who later became my boss. I took part in the interviews. I helped choose her. At first, it seemed like a good decision. But at some point, she began treating me as if I wanted her position. The relationship kept getting worse until I was fired. And I will never know whether it was truly fear of losing her place. But I do know how strange it feels when someone turns your competence into a threat. So, my friends, as I always say, history doesn't repeat it. People do.